The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the streets into rivers of gray and the sky into something that forgot what sunlight looked like. Rick McBride pulled his jacket tighter as he walked the last 4 blocks to the bus stop, his work boots heavy with water, his shoulders heavy with everything else. He had just finished a double shift at the warehouse, 16 hours of loading and unloading trucks, and his body ached in places he didn't know could ache. But the ache in his chest was worse. That one never went away. His daughter Lily was waiting for him at Mrs. Patterson's apartment, probably already asleep on the old woman's couch, clutching that stuffed rabbit she refused to let go of since her mother left. Lily was 6 years old and she still believed her daddy could fix anything. Rick wasn't sure how much longer he could keep that illusion alive. The bus stop appeared through the curtain of rain, just a metal bench and a flickering overhead light that buzzed like it was trying to decide whether to give up entirely. Rick almost walked past the figure huddled at the far end of the bench. Almost. But something made him stop. She was curled into herself, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around her body like she was trying to hold herself together. Her clothes were soaked through, clinging to a frame that looked too thin, too fragile. Her hair hung in wet strands across a face that was turned away from him, but he could see her shoulders shaking, not from the cold, from something deeper. Rick stood there for a moment, rain streaming down his face, every rational thought telling him to keep walking. He had nothing to give. His wallet held exactly $12, enough for bus fare for the week and maybe, if he was lucky, a loaf of bread and some peanut butter for Lily's lunches. He had his own problems, his own daughter to feed, his own life falling apart one bill at a time. But he thought about Lily, about how she looked at strangers with that open, trusting gaze that hadn't yet learned the world could be cruel, about what he was teaching her every single day just by being who he was. He sat down on the bench, leaving space between them, and said nothing. Just sat there in the rain like it was the most natural thing in the world. The woman didn't move, didn't acknowledge him. But after a few minutes, her shoulders stopped shaking quite so hard. Rick reached into his jacket and pulled out the sandwich he'd been saving for his own dinner. Turkey and cheese on white bread, wrapped in plastic from the warehouse vending machine. He'd been looking forward to it for hours. He set it on the bench between them without a word. The woman's head turned slowly. Her eyes were red-rimmed, hollow with exhaustion, but beneath that, beneath the layers of pain and hunger and whatever had brought her to this bench on this night, there was something else. Intelligence, dignity, a spark that hadn't quite been extinguished. She looked at the sandwich, then at Rick, then back at the sandwich. Her voice came out cracked, barely above a whisper. "I can't take your food." Rick shrugged, keeping his eyes forward. Already ate. The lie sat heavy on his tongue, but it felt less heavy than watching her starve. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she said something that made Rick's blood run cold. "I know you didn't. I watched you work all day. I've been watching you for a week." Rick turned to look at her fully for the first time. Her face was gaunt but not old, maybe early 30s. There were bruises fading to yellow along her jaw, and her hands, when she finally reached for the sandwich, trembled with more than cold. "What do you mean you've been watching me?" She unwrapped the sandwich slowly, reverently, like it was something precious. "You're the only one who ever looks at me. Everyone else walks past like I'm not even here. But you look. Every day you look at me like I'm a person." The words hit Rick somewhere deep, somewhere he'd thought had gone numb years ago. He swallowed hard. "You are a person." Her laugh was bitter, broken. "Not according to most people, not according to the ones who put me here." She took a bite of the sandwich and closed her eyes, and Rick watched a tear slide down her cheek, mixing with the rain. After a long moment, she spoke again. "My name is Gail Bishop. I used to be someone." Rick didn't push, didn't ask what she meant by used to be. He just nodded. "I'm Rick McBride. I've got a little girl named Lily. She's 6. She thinks I hung the moon." Gail's expression softened just slightly. "Hold on to that. Hold on to her. Children are the only ones who see us clearly." They finished sitting in silence, Gail eating the sandwich in small, careful bites like she was trying to make it last forever, Rick watching the rain and wondering how his life had led him to this moment, this bench, this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. When the bus finally came, Rick stood and reached into his pocket. He pulled out $6, half of everything he had, and held it out to her. Gail shook her head. "You already gave me your dinner. I saw you. I know that was supposed to be your meal." "Take it," Rick said firmly. "Please." She looked at the money, then at him, and something shifted in her eyes, something that looked almost like hope, fragile and terrified of itself. "Why are you doing this?" Rick thought about the question, thought about all the nights he'd gone hungry so Lily could eat, all the times he'd wondered if anyone in the world would do the same for them if they needed it. "Because someone has to," he said simply. And then he got on the bus and didn't look back, because if he looked back, he might see his own desperation reflected in her eyes, and he wasn't sure he could survive that. The next morning, Rick woke to Lily's small hand patting his cheek. "Daddy. Daddy, someone's at the door." Rick groaned, every muscle protesting as he pulled himself off, the mattress on the floor. Their apartment was small, one bedroom that he'd given to Lily while he slept in the living room on a mattress he'd found by a dumpster, but it was clean, and it was theirs, and the rent was only 2 weeks late this month instead of 3. He shuffled to the door in his boxers and undershirt, expecting Mrs. Patterson or maybe the landlord coming to remind him about that late rent. Instead, he found Gail, but not the Gail from last night. This woman wore a tailored coat that probably cost more than Rick made in a month. Her hair was styled, her makeup flawless, her posture straight and confident. Behind her stood 2 men in suits who looked like they meant business, and parked at the curb was a black car so expensive it seemed to bend the light around it. Rick blinked, convinced he was still asleep. "Gail?" Her smile was small but genuine. "Hello, Rick. May I come in?" He stepped back automatically, suddenly aware of how shabby the apartment looked, how his undershirt had a hole near the collar, how there were dishes in the sink because he'd been too exhausted to wash them last night. Lily appeared at his side, clutching her rabbit, her eyes wide as she took in the elegant stranger. "Daddy, is she a princess?" Gail knelt down to Lily's level, her expensive coat brushing the worn carpet. "I'm not a princess, sweetheart, but I think your daddy might be a king." She looked up at Rick, her eyes serious now, all pretense stripped away. "We need to talk. I have something to tell you, and something to offer." Rick's hand found Lily's shoulder, instinctively protective. "What's going on? Who are you, really?" Gail stood, smoothing her coat. "My name is Gail Bishop. I'm the founder and CEO of Bishop Enterprises. You might have seen our buildings downtown, the ones with the glass towers and the rooftop gardens." Rick had seen them. Everyone had seen them. Bishop Enterprises was one of the biggest development companies in the city, known for building affordable housing alongside luxury properties, for treating workers fairly, for being the kind of company people actually wanted to work for. "That's you?" Rick said, his voice barely above a whisper. Gail nodded. "That's me, or it was, until 3 weeks ago, when my business partner tried to have me killed." The story came out in pieces as Gail sat at Rick's small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of instant coffee like it was the finest thing she'd ever tasted. Lily sat on Rick's lap, listening with the intense focus of a child who knew something important was happening, even if she didn't understand what. Gail's business partner, a man named Victor Crane, had been embezzling money from the company for years. When Gail discovered it and threatened to go to the board, Victor had her attacked and left for dead in an alley downtown. He'd paid off police, destroyed evidence, and convinced the world that Gail had suffered a mental breakdown and disappeared voluntarily. "For 3 weeks, I lived on the streets," Gail said, her voice steady but her eyes haunted. "No money, no phone, no identification. Everyone I tried to contact had been warned that I was unstable, dangerous, not to be trusted. Victor had been planning this for a long time. He made sure I had nowhere to turn." She looked at Rick and he saw the depth of what she'd survived in that gaze. I watched people walk past me every day, hundreds of them. They looked right through me like I was invisible. And then there was you. You looked at me like I mattered. You gave me food when you had nothing. You gave me money you couldn't afford. You sat with me in the rain just so I wouldn't be alone. Rick shifted uncomfortably. It was just a sandwich. It was everything, Gail said firmly. It reminded me that there was still goodness in the world, that not everyone was like Victor. It gave me the strength to keep fighting, to find a way back. She explained how she'd managed to contact a former employee who'd believed her story, how together they'd gathered enough evidence to prove what Victor had done, how yesterday Victor had been arrested and Gail had reclaimed control of her company and her life. And now I'm here, she said, because I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. But I'd like to try. Rick's arms tightened around Lily. I didn't help you because I wanted anything in return. I know. That's exactly why I want to help you. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. I've done my research, Rick. I know about the double shifts. I know about the late rent. I know about the medical bills from when Lily was in the hospital last year, the ones you've been paying off $20 at a time. I know about the promotion you didn't get because you couldn't work overtime when Lily was sick. I know how hard you've been fighting just to keep your head above water. Rick felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt in years. It's not that bad, he said, the words automatic, the same words he said to everyone who asked how he was doing. It's exactly that bad, Gail said gently, and it doesn't have to be. Not anymore. She offered him a job, not charity, she emphasized, but a real position at Bishop Enterprises, building manager for one of their affordable housing complexes, the kind of job that came with a salary that made Rick's head spin, health insurance, a pension, and an apartment on site that was 3 times the size of the place they lived now. I need people I can trust, Gail said, people with integrity, people who do the right thing when no one's watching. You showed me who you are, Rick. I want you on my team. Rick looked at Lily, who was staring at Gail with something like wonder. Then he looked around the apartment, at the water stain on the ceiling, the drafty windows, the mattress on the floor where he slept. He thought about all the nights he'd lain awake wondering how he was going to make it to the next paycheck. I don't know anything about managing buildings, he admitted. You know how to work hard. You know how to treat people with dignity. Everything else can be taught. Lily tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, I think you should say yes. She seems nice, and her coat is really pretty. Rick laughed despite himself, the sound surprising him. It had been a long time since he'd laughed. Okay, he said finally. Okay, I'll do it. Gail's smile transformed her whole face. Good. You start Monday. The transition happened faster than Rick could process. One week he was loading trucks in a warehouse, and the next he was walking through the halls of a clean, well-maintained apartment building, learning the names of residents, coordinating with maintenance crews, solving problems that actually had solutions. The apartment they moved into had 2 real bedrooms, a kitchen with appliances that worked, windows that didn't let in drafts, and a view of a small courtyard where children played after school. Lily claimed her new room with a squeal of delight, immediately setting up her stuffed rabbit on the bed and declaring it the most beautiful room in the whole world. Rick stood in the doorway watching her, tears streaming down his face that he didn't bother to wipe away. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe. Gail stopped by regularly at first, ostensibly to check on the building, but really, Rick suspected, to check on them. She brought books for Lily, picture books about buildings and architecture that made the little girl's eyes light up. She brought coffee for Rick, the good kind, and sat with him in his small office while he learned the ropes of his new job. She never made him feel stupid for not knowing things, never made him feel like he was a charity case. She treated him like a colleague, like an equal, like someone whose opinion mattered. The residents of the building seemed to feel the same way. Within a month, Rick knew everyone by name. He knew that Mrs. Chen in 4B needed her medication delivered because her arthritis made it hard to walk to the pharmacy. He knew that the Delgado kids in 2A were struggling in school because their parents worked nights and couldn't help with homework. He knew that old Mr. Fitzgerald on the top floor had been a jazz musician in his youth and still played trumpet in his apartment at exactly 3 p.m. every day. He started a homework help program in the community room, organized a shuttle service for residents who needed help getting to doctor's appointments, convinced the maintenance team to plant a small garden in the courtyard where residents could grow vegetables. Small things, maybe, but they mattered to the people who lived there. And for the first time in his life, Rick felt like his work mattered too. "Daddy," Lily said one evening as Rick tucked her into bed, "do you think Miss Gail is lonely?" Rick paused, his hand still smoothing her blanket. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart? She always looks happy when she's here with us. But when she leaves, her eyes get sad, like she's going somewhere she doesn't want to go." Rick thought about all the times he'd seen Gail smile falter when she thought no one was watching, about the shadows under her eyes that even expensive makeup couldn't quite hide, about the way she lingered sometimes, as if the quiet comfort of their small apartment was something she was reluctant to leave behind. "I think Miss Gail has been through a lot," Rick said carefully. "Sometimes people who have everything still feel alone." "Maybe we should invite her to dinner," Lily suggested. "And to my soccer game on Saturday. I bet she's never been to a soccer game." Rick smiled, his heart swelling with love for this small person who saw the world so clearly. "I think that's a great idea, baby." The dinner invitation came on a Thursday, and Gail accepted so quickly that Rick suspected Lily might be right about the loneliness. She arrived at their door with flowers for the table and a toy for Lily that she swore she just happened to see in a store window, and Rick pretended not to notice how her hands shook slightly as she arranged the flowers in a vase. They ate spaghetti that Rick had made from scratch, one of the only dishes he could cook well, and Gail declared it the best meal she'd had in months. Lily chattered through dinner about school and soccer and her best friend Maya, who could do a cartwheel, but Lily was better at running. After dinner, while Lily was supposed to be brushing her teeth but was probably playing with the new toy instead, Gail helped Rick wash dishes. They stood side by side at the sink, the domesticity of the moment both strange and comfortable. "You're good at this," Gail said, handing him a plate to dry. "At cooking, at all of it, being a father, making a home, creating community. I walked through the building yesterday. The residents can't stop talking about you. Half of them wanted to tell me stories about something nice you'd done for them." Rick shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just pay attention. That's rarer than you think." She was quiet for a moment, her hands still in the soapy water. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When Victor had me attacked, when I was lying in that alley thinking I might die, my biggest regret wasn't about the company. It wasn't about money or success or any of the things I'd spent my whole life building. It was that I'd spent so much time building things that I'd never built a life. No family, no real friends, no one who would notice if I disappeared." She looked at him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And then I did disappear, and the only person who saw me, really saw me, was a stranger at a bus stop who gave me his sandwich in the rain." Rick didn't know what to say, so he said the only thing that felt true. "You're not invisible anymore, Gail. Not to us." She smiled and a tear escaped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. "I should go. It's late." Lily appeared in the doorway, already in her pajamas. "Are you coming to my soccer game on Saturday?" Gail looked at Rick, questioning, "If it's okay with your dad." Rick nodded. "We'd like that." Gail's smile widened, and this time it reached her eyes. "Then I'll be there." The soccer game was chaos in the best possible way. Tiny children in matching jerseys running in mostly the wrong directions, parents cheering for every kick whether it connected or not, coaches trying vainly to implement something resembling strategy. Lily was in the middle of it all, her ponytail bouncing, her face set with fierce concentration. Gail stood beside Rick on the sidelines, cheering so loudly that several other parents looked over with amused surprise. When Lily accidentally scored a goal by running the wrong way and kicking the ball into her own team's net, Gail was the first one to assure her it was the most impressive kick of the whole game. Afterward, they got ice cream, Lily's choice, and sat on a bench in the park watching the afternoon sun filter through the trees. Lily had chocolate ice cream smeared across her cheeks and a gap-toothed grin that made Rick's heart hurt with love. "This is the best day ever," she declared. Then, with the devastating honesty of childhood, "Miss Gail, do you have a little girl?" Gail's smile flickered. "No, sweetheart, I never had children." "Why not?" "Lily," Rick started, but Gail shook her head slightly. "It's okay." She knelt down to Lily's level. "I was always so busy with work that I kept thinking I'd have a family later, someday when I had time, but someday never came." She smoothed a strand of hair from Lily's face. "That's why it's so special for me to spend time with you. You remind me of all the things that really matter." Lily considered this with the gravity only a 6-year-old could muster. "You could be part of our family," she said matter-of-factly. "We're small, but we're good." Then, ice cream situation becoming critical, she scampered off to chase a pigeon, leaving Rick and Gail in stunned silence. "Sorry," Rick said, his face flushing. "She doesn't really have a filter. Don't apologize." Gail's voice was thick. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. They watched Lily run in circles around the pigeons, her laughter carrying across the park. Something had shifted between them, Rick realized. Something he wasn't sure he was ready to name. But whatever it was, it felt less like something beginning and more like something that had been there all along, waiting for them both to be brave enough to see it. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks later. Rick was in his office going over maintenance requests when his phone rang, an unfamiliar number. He answered anyway. "Mr. McBride," a smooth voice said. "My name is Victor Crane. I believe we should talk." Rick's blood went cold. He knew that name. Knew it from Gail's story, from the news coverage of the arrest and the trial that was still ongoing. Victor Crane was out on bail, awaiting trial for attempted murder, embezzlement, and a dozen other charges. "I have nothing to say to you," Rick said, his grip tightening on the phone. "Oh, I think you do." The voice was pleasant, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. "I understand you've become quite close with my former business partner. Close enough that she's given you a rather lucrative position at the company. The job she gave me is none of your business." "But it is my business," Mr. Crane said. "Everything about Bishop Enterprises is my business. I built that company as much as she did. More, perhaps. And I don't appreciate being pushed out by a woman who's clearly lost her grip on reality." Rick's hand trembled with anger. "You tried to kill her. I tried to protect the company from her instability. The fact that she's now entrusting key positions to homeless men she meets on the street proves my point." "I wasn't homeless," Rick said through gritted teeth, "and neither was she until you put her there." There was a pause on the line. Then Victor's voice came back, harder now, the pleasant facade cracking. "Listen to me carefully, Mr. McBride. This trial isn't over. These charges won't stick. And when I'm acquitted, I'm going to take back everything Gail stole from me, including that building you're managing, including that apartment you're living in, including that nice little job that lets you play house with a woman way out of your league." Rick felt sick. "Are you threatening me? I'm informing you. There's a difference. You have a daughter, don't you?" "Lily, I think. Just turned 6. The world tilted. Rick gripped the edge of his desk. "If you go anywhere near my daughter, stay away from Gail Bishop," Victor interrupted. "Convince her to settle this privately, out of court, and maybe I'll forget you exist." Otherwise, he left the threat unfinished, which was somehow worse than any specific words could have been. The line went dead. Rick sat frozen for a long moment, his heart pounding, his mind racing. Then he picked up the phone and called Gail. She arrived within the hour, flanked by her security team, her face pale when Rick told her about the call. "This is my fault," she said, pacing his small office. I never should have involved you. I should have known Victor would try something like this. What do we do? Rick asked. You do nothing. Gail's voice was firm. You take Lily and you stay somewhere safe. I'll have security escort you to a hotel. We can stay there until... No, Rick stood, and something in his voice made Gail stop pacing. I'm not running. I'm not hiding my daughter away like we did something wrong. This is our home. You gave us that. I'm not going to let him take it away. Gail stared at him. Rick, you don't understand. Victor is dangerous. I've dealt with dangerous before, Rick said quietly. My ex-wife, Lily's mother, she had a temper, liked to throw things when she was angry, liked to throw them at me, at Lily. I learned how to stand between my daughter and someone who wanted to hurt her a long time ago. Gail's expression shifted, understanding dawning. I didn't know. I don't talk about it. The point is, I'm not going to let fear control my life anymore, and I'm not going to teach Lily that running is the answer, so we're going to figure this out together. Together. Gail repeated the word like she was tasting it. You don't have to do this. You could walk away right now. Take another job somewhere far from here. Be safe. I could, Rick agreed. But then who would you have? The question hung in the air between them, carrying weight neither of them had spoken aloud before. Gail's eyes filled with tears. Why? She whispered. Why do you keep choosing the hard thing? Why do you keep choosing me? Rick crossed the space between them in 2 steps. He took her hands in his, felt them trembling, and held on tighter. Because that night at the bus stop you asked me why I was helping you. I said it was because someone had to. But that wasn't the whole truth. The truth is, when I looked at you, I saw myself. I saw someone who was barely holding on, who had been knocked down so many times they'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up. And I thought, if I can't help her, if I can't be the person who believes in her when no one else does, then what kind of man am I? What kind of father am I teaching Lily to be? He squeezed her hands. You didn't need saving, Gail. You needed someone to see you, to remind you that you were worth fighting for. And now it's my turn to need reminding. I'm scared. I'm terrified, actually. But I'm not going to let that fear win. Not this time. Gail was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. You're the best man I've ever known, she whispered. Rick shook his head. I'm just a guy who gave away his sandwich once. Everything else grew from that. The next few weeks were tense, a siege mentality settling over their small world. Gail increased security at the building. Rick walked Lily to school every morning and picked her up every afternoon, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. Victor's trial progressed in fits and starts, his expensive lawyers filing motion after motion, dragging out the proceedings with technicalities and delays. But Rick and Gail faced it together. They developed a rhythm, a partnership that extended beyond the professional. Gail started having dinner at their apartment most nights, helping Lily with homework, teaching her about architecture and design using building blocks and drawings. Rick learned more about Gail's world, attending board meetings, understanding the business that employed him. They complemented each other, filling in each other's gaps, building something stronger than either could have built alone. The other residents noticed. Mrs. Chen started leaving extra portions of her famous dumplings at Rick's door with a knowing smile. The Delgado kids made a card that said, Miss Gail be Mr. Rick inside a heart. Old Mr. Fitzgerald started playing love songs on his trumpet at 3 p.m. instead of jazz. It was obvious to everyone, it seemed, except to Rick and Gail themselves. Or maybe they were both just afraid to say it out loud, afraid that naming it would make it vulnerable, that Victor would find a way to use it against them. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday. Gail's lawyers discovered that Victor had been communicating with associates in violation of his bail conditions, attempting to sabotage the trial from the outside. Combined with his threatening phone call to Rick, which had been recorded by the building's security system, the judge had enough. Bail was revoked. Victor was taken into custody. And a week later, faced with the mounting evidence, he accepted a plea deal that would put him away for 15 years. It's over, Gail said when she called Rick with the news. Her voice was shaking. It's really over. Rick closed his eyes, relief flooding through him like a physical sensation. Come over, he said. Lily's been asking about you. She arrived at their door that evening with champagne and tears in her eyes. Lily tackled her in a hug before she even made it through the doorway, and Rick watched them laugh and cry together, these two people who had become his whole world. After Lily went to bed, they sat on the couch in the quiet apartment, the champagne half drunk, the city lights twinkling through the window. It's strange, Gail said softly. I spent years building a company, millions of dollars, hundreds of employees, and none of it made me feel as rich as this. As what? As sitting here with you. As watching Lily fall asleep. As knowing that tomorrow I'll wake up and you'll both still be here. She turned to look at him. I think I've been falling in love with you since that night at the bus stop, since you sat down next to me in the rain like it was nothing, like I was worth sitting with. Rick's heart was pounding. He'd known. Of course he'd known. But hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I was terrified, he admitted. Still am, a little. You're you. You have everything. And I'm just the man who saw me, Gail interrupted. When no one else did. When I was invisible to the whole world. You saw me, and you didn't want anything from me. You just wanted to help. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how precious? She reached out, her hand cupping his face. I don't care about the money, Rick. I don't care about the difference in our backgrounds. I care about you. I care about Lily. I care about this family we've been building without either of us being brave enough to call it that. Rick leaned into her touch. What do we call it now? Gail smiled, tears glittering in her eyes. I was hoping you might have some ideas. He kissed her. Softly at first, tentatively, like a question being asked. And when she kissed him back, answering, he felt something inside him break open. All the walls he'd built, all the defenses he'd constructed, they crumbled away and left only this. This moment, this woman, this impossible, miraculous second chance. Daddy? They broke apart to find Lily standing in the hallway, her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms, her eyes wide. Does this mean Miss Gail is going to be my new mommy? Rick looked at Gail. Gail looked at Rick. They both burst out laughing, the tension of weeks finally releasing in that shared moment of joy. What do you think? Gail asked Lily. Would that be okay with you? Lily considered this seriously. Only if you promise to come to all my soccer games. Every single one, Gail promised, and make spaghetti with Daddy on Thursdays. That can be arranged. And read me stories before bed with all the voices. I do excellent voices. Lily nodded, satisfied. Then I guess it's okay. She pattered over and climbed onto the couch between them, squirming until she was comfortable. This is nice, she declared. This is our family now. Over my head, Rick's eyes met Gail's, and in that gaze was everything they'd been through. The rain and the hunger and the fear, the kindness and the courage and the hope, the long winding road that had led them from a bus stop bench to this moment, this family, this home. 6 months later, they got married in the courtyard of the apartment building, surrounded by the residents who had become their community. Mrs. Chen made dumplings, the Delgado kids threw flower petals. Mr. Fitzgerald played the wedding march on his trumpet, then immediately switched to a jazz improvisation that had everyone laughing. Lily was the flower girl, taking her duties extremely seriously, correcting the path of petals that strayed from her approved trajectory. She wore a white dress that matched Gail's simpler gown, and when the ceremony was over, she demanded to be picked up so she could be part of the first family hug. They bought a house eventually, a real house with a yard for Lily to play in, but they kept the apartment building, kept Rick's position as manager. The residents joked that they'd never leave now, not when they had the boss's husband looking after them. Gail stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Bishop Enterprises, promoting trusted people into leadership roles while she focused on the foundation they started together. The Second Chance Initiative, they called it. It provided housing and job training and support for people who'd fallen on hard times, people who'd become invisible, people who just needed someone to see them. Every year on the anniversary of that rainy night at the bus stop, Rick and Gail went back there. They sat on the bench, sometimes with Lily, sometimes just the two of them, and they remembered how far they'd come, remembered how close they'd both come to losing everything, remembered that everything had started with a sandwich shared in the rain.